What is the best Android One smartphone available in Malaysia right now? But before we go into what devices are available in Malaysia and which one you should get, I'm a bit like confused of what actually is Android One. So, what's Android One?
Okay, so Android One started out as like this program from Google. It's a not a software program, but like an initiative, lah, right? So it's this program from Google where it's designed to help affordable smartphones, really entry-level smartphones that really don't have much going for them in terms of hardware. So you're looking at like really entry-level processors. You're looking at 1 gig of RAM, 8 gigs of storage, stuff like that. So it's a really optimized version of Android, like a clean stock experience that can run even on the most rudimentary hardware. So the most basic, like bare bones kind of hardware, it can run this Android One. So that's what this program is all about.
So it started out as that. So
Yes.
the notion was to run a software that can run on basic hardware, and then
Exactly. So that was to help development in the emerging markets, right? Like India or Indonesia, for example. And then it evolved. So once like these countries started developing, and then you can see the evolution in Android One. And it actually started with the Xiaomi Mi A1, which is actually a very interesting thing that I think I'll get into a bit later. So then it evolved into not just being for these basic entry-level smartphones. It became just something simple as getting really clean stock version of Android with no added bloatware straight out of Google into your smartphone. So you're guaranteed 2 years of software support. That means if your phone launches with Android 9, for example, it should get 10 and 11 as well. So it's a really stock version of Android that manufacturers don't really need to tinker around with, and you can get it. It gives you almost a similar experience to the Google Pixel's software. So it's this really clean, really stock Android that works with all sorts of phones. So you see it on mid-range devices most commonly, but you also see it on flagships like with Nokia, for example. And then that entry-level side, where it was designed for really basic smartphones, that became Android Go, which sort of launched with Android Oreo. So there was Android Oreo Go Edition. So that was all about memory optimization, about data optimization, because 4G quota can be very expensive in emerging markets. So it's about controlling these two things so that your phone will run as optimally as possible. One example is the Nokia One, which actually launched here in Malaysia. So that was like this colorful device with cases that you can actually swap, and then that became
plastic body.
Yeah, plastic body, and really like a basic screen. So it's a basic smartphone experience, but you still get full Google. So there were even like light apps, Go optimized apps is what they call it. So that became the light version. And then Android One was allowed to evolve into this basically stock Android promise, and that's it.
Okay, so the way I see it from what you explained, right, there's 3 layers. So you have the Android Go, which is like for cheap devices, developed for the proliferation of smartphones in developing markets like India, Indonesia, maybe slightly in Malaysia, Vietnam, and things like that. And then you have Android One, which is the promise of stock Android on other devices other than Google, right?
Yes.
So, because Pixel is stock Android, but it's not considered Android One.
Not to my knowledge, no, because that's a Google thing. Yeah.
So is it like a different version of a software, or is it just like a branding?
I'm not too sure about that because I'm not sure what happens in sort of like the back end side of things. But with regards to how you use it, the UI, for example, it's actually very similar between Android One devices and the Google Pixel devices. So it's really, really similar. You're getting pretty much the identical experience across these two devices.
Yeah, but for me, right, so we talk about this promise of stock Android. So I've tried a number of phones with stock Android. I don't know, I don't get it. I mean, stock Android really means stock. You don't get a lot of software, and you have to download a lot of software. For example, you don't even have like Facebook, you don't have Instagram and Twitter. You don't have basic tools like, I don't know what is a calculator. There is a calculator.
There's no calculator.
Yeah, so there's nothing, right? It's
Nothing.
basically like an OS, and for me, it's a bit cumbersome to download all those things. The good part is, okay, I get the promise of getting updates really quickly. That means it's secure because I get more security updates quickly, and I'm promised 2 years of security of software updates. But I don't really, I guess I don't really appreciate the promise of a stock Android because of the cumbersomeness, not cumbersome, because of the hassle of needing to download things. what are the other benefits? I mean, why do you need stock Android?
So I think there are two ways to look at this. The stock Android, you see it as this really bare bones system.
Basic.
With not a whole bunch of features that you might normally find.
I mean,
on
the
like
features are there, but it's the software.
Correct.
The tools.
So the tool, exactly, tools. So not having the tools is one way to look at it, but another way to look at it is you have this sort of clean slate that you can decide what goes in. You don't have to worry about removing or uninstalling apps that you don't need. For example, let's compare it to Huawei's EMUI, right? That comes with a whole bunch of Huawei apps. So you have multiples, you have duplicate apps. For example, you have Google Photos and you also have the Gallery app, which is not something people want. So it takes up space. And then there are also third-party apps. For example, there's Booking.com. And then if you look at in the Indonesian market, there are also specific apps that are designed that have to be preloaded in like a non-stock Android device. So those they could encounter problems when it comes to software updates down the line, because you have to make sure everything works properly before your phone starts running. So that, from my understanding, will slow down software update times, and it will even create sometimes software bugs, which I have experienced before with these
I remember
premium
you
apps.
tried with the Zenfone Max, right?
Yes.
So there was a software that literally crashed the phone.
It killed the phone completely.
But it was a prototype, right?
I mean, it was
the software was a pre-release.
Yes, exactly. So it was an early I think they call it a engineering sample when we first got it. It wasn't a retail unit.
It's good that you mentioned that, because I don't realize that Gallery is a software that you need to download, right? So if I use my Note, for example, right, the Gallery software is there. So with Android One, I have to download.
Not
Gallery.
Necessarily. It comes with photos.
It comes with Google Photos.
Yes.
So you don't have that duplicate.
Exactly.
I guess that would be something that's beneficial.
But it's definitely not for everyone, because I know a lot of people who prefer these Android skins with all these features. So they have, like, for example, even actually if you look at something like a Xiaomi Android One device, they actually come preloaded with a couple of apps that are designed to a couple of tools to help you along the way. So they have the calculator, for example. Some even come with their own version of their own camera app, because in the beginning, Google didn't have a camera app that could support dual cameras. So Xiaomi had to put their own one in. So that's not like completely stock version, because the completely stock one that comes with Android One doesn't have all these features.
Yeah, that's kind of cheating, right? It's kind of like defeating the purpose of like the promise of a stock Android. So now I'm like slightly even more confused, because so you have Android One, which you say is like the stock version.
Yes.
But manufacturers are allowed to put in.
They can if they want, but I'm not entirely sure what the rules are here from the manufacturer standpoint. So I guess you can sort of change things up if you want, because there have been a couple of apps, but they're very minimal. They're not apps that you won't use, for example. So they're more like tools than actual applications.
So it's not like third-party apps.
It's not like Booking.
It's not going to be like a travel app.
Exactly.
So as a brand, right, so as a flavor, there's Android Go, which is for cheap devices, for entry-level devices, and then there's the Android, which is like it can be customized by manufacturers like Samsung or Xiaomi or Huawei, and then in the middle is this Android One, which tries or tries to deliver the purest experience of Android, other than Google devices.
Yes.
So outside of Pixel, which is like the purest form of Android, you have Android One.
Exactly.
And then but we see Android One devices, so we see Android One devices as like mostly fairly cheap. I don't recall having like a flagship spec Android One.
There are actually flagship spec Android ones, but not many.
Alright, so before you go into that, like the levels of Android Ones, right? So we're talking about the best Android One smartphone you can get in Malaysia. We just finished covering about what Android One is. Then I want to know, like, what Android One devices are available currently in the country.
In Malaysia, the choices are actually not that high. So we don't have like all the Android ones. Most notably, we don't have most of Motorola's devices, which are also, if I'm not mistaken, all Android One phones. And they have some models with both Android One and their own Moto skin, but we don't get a lot of their Android One devices. So in Malaysia, That did change regarding Motorola, where we have the latest version of the Motorola phone to come into Malaysia, which is this one, which is the Motorola One. That's all. That's what it's called.
So the device is called Motorola One?
It's called the Motorola
Yeah,
One. So it's an Android One device from Motorola. So this is a mid-range smartphone, like you said. I agree, most of the devices that you will see running Android One tend to be mid-ranger devices. But there are a couple of flagships that we will touch on a bit later.
Okay.
But this is the latest Android One phone to come into Malaysia from Motorola. And I think it's been a while. This is like the first Motorola to come into Malaysia in like quite a long time. So the last one was, I believe, the Z series, which is their flagship device. So this phone, honestly, I'm not super impressed with it because the specs are like, it has a Snapdragon 625 processor. It only has a 3000 mAh battery. But worst of all, it has a 720p screen.
Wow.
Which
that's the same as the iPhone XR.
well, I mean, if you put it that way.
But I don't like the biggest problem with the iPhone XR is the 720p display.
Yes, exactly.
And
so this has a 720p display, and the problem with this is that it's actually quite expensive. You're paying a premium for this smartphone. It's 799 ringgit. So for that kind of money, you can actually get something like this, which is the Mi A2, which is the successor to the Mi A1, which was like the first phone that kickstarted this whole all-new Android One program. So this was a much hyped phone. A lot of people are looking forward to it, and it's one of those devices where it's like, wow, you know. So let me give you a bit of history about the Mi A1 series, which I was really excited about. So Xiaomi as a company are this smartphone makers that pair a lot of good hardware with a very low price. So that was like the biggest selling point. That's why people that's why their Mi fans, as they call them, are really, really loyal, because they love them because of the amount of phone that you can get for the money that you pay.
And then they took it like a level higher with Poco.
Yes. So with Poco, which which subscribed to that same philosophy, you know. So they made the certain trade-offs. There are definitely trade-offs, of course, but the result is you can get a really good phone for whatever price point that you pay. So then the problem I had with Xiaomi was that all their devices ran on MIUI, and I'm not the biggest fan of MIUI. That sort of changed a bit with MIUI 10, but in general, before that, from 9 down, I wasn't a big fan of it because it looked really cartoony. I didn't have the option to add more icons onto my home screen. There were only 4. There is no app drawer, for example. Those are
you can only add 4 icons
in a row.
Okay.
Yeah, in a row, so you can only have 4. So even if you had a really high resolution screen, a really big screen, you would just have 4 really far icons that are really far apart. So it's very similar to iOS in that sense. So that was my biggest problem with it. And then if you wanted like a close to stock or near stock Android experience, you had to pay more because you couldn't get a Xiaomi device because they were king at that time. But then came the Mi A1, which was like this value for money. It had excellent specs for the time that it launched. It had Xiaomi's low prices, but it also came with Android One, which is this really stock version of Android, and it was like everyone was like, what? You know, it's like the stars aligned for people who are stock Android fans. You could get awesome hardware from Xiaomi and great software from Google. So that was perfect. And then came this, which was the Mi A2, which is a successor device to that. So this was honestly received with a bit of a lukewarm reception because for me, the biggest problem with this was the battery. So it's only a 3000 mAh cell. But it has great internals besides the battery. So you have a Snapdragon 660 processor, which is an upper mid-range processor. Normally you have to pay more than 1,000 ringgit easily for that kind of processing power at the time. And it has 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage. But this can be yours for the same price as this, which is a Snapdragon 625. Much older, much less powerful.
So it has a better processor, better display, right?
Better display also. This is full HD.
And I would argue that maybe the camera is better as well.
Yes, I would think so. But I haven't tested the Motorola One's camera yet, though this camera is really, really impressive.
Yeah, for the price, right? I remember that the Mi A1 and the Mi A2 had cameras that were, well, if they're not on par, but they could give a lot of the flagships a run for the money.
In good lighting, definitely. In fact, this has a dual camera setup, right? So one of it is a 12 megapixel sensor, and the other one's a 20 megapixel sensor. So the 20 megapixel sensor is, so that means this dual camera setup is slightly different from the Mi A1, which had two of the same sensors but at different focal lengths. So these are same focal length but different sensors. So the 20 megapixel one, it's there to improve low light performance, because the old one wasn't very good at low light. This is slightly better.
So with 20 megapixel, you get pixel binning.
Yes, you get 4-in-1 pixel binning, so you can get that larger pixels for more light.
Yeah, so for those who are not familiar with what pixel binning is, right? So it's when 4 pixel combines to become 1. So if it's 4, right? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 in a grid. Those pixels combine to create 1 megapixel. The logic behind that is that it captures more detail, but more light. That means low light is improved.
Yes.
So the Xiaomi Mi A2 has that. What about the Motorola one?
The Motorola one, I'm not entirely sure if it has.
What camera does it have?
This has hang on, I have my notes here. It has a 13 megapixel plus 2 megapixel sensor.
Yeah, so the 2
is,
megapixels probably is for depth of field.
It's for depth effects, yes. Yeah. So it's not a super impressive camera. And the lens aperture on this is f2. This is f1.75.
So definitely out of the bat, this would be better.
Yeah, my guess, this will definitely be better in photography in general as well. Yeah.
So already we can establish that the Mi A2 is probably up there in terms of your favorites, right?
Yes.
So we have the Motorola One and then the Mi A2. Both are running on Android One.
Android One. Yes.
What other Android One devices are available in Malaysia right now?
Okay. For me, so if I had to pick an Android One device right now, it would be this one.
Okay.
Even though it has a small battery, but the rest of the specs are
Does the small battery really affect? You reviewed this already, right?
I haven't published a review yet, but I have used this for extended periods of time.
So what's the screen on time?
This is not very great. It's like below 4 hours.
Okay, so on average, I mean, we try a lot of phones. One of the parameters when we go out to test a phone is to establish the screen on time.
Yes.
So there's a battery tracker that we install, and also there's a battery tracker inside the OS itself. And it tracks the screen on time. That means how long is the screen turned on for the duration of the battery in between charges. So on average, a good device would probably have about 5 and above in terms of screen on time. 5 hours and above.
5 is like the right in the middle point.
Yeah, that's like, okay, you need to be on par with everybody in terms of good battery life. You need to have a minimum of 5 hours screen on time, irrespective of whatever you're using, right? Because the OS can optimize the things that you do. Having 5 hour and below is a bit of an issue, and I do see phones that have about the same battery size, 3000, and still able to churn out 5 plus hours.
One good example is the Mi A1.
Yeah, it was able to do 5 plus hours,
Yes,
right?
yes.
The disconcerting thing for me is this is running Android One, which theoretically should be the same experience, which theoretically should also optimize the battery and everything else. And there is no reason for it to run 5 hours or less. The display is also the same, right?
Yes, the display is the same, but the processor is different. So the Mi A1 has a more frugal 625.
I see.
Yeah, which is slightly lower powered from the 660, but it's probably most well known for being really frugal. So it sips at power.
The processor.
Yes, the 625.
This one has more RAM as well, right?
This has no. There is also a 4 gig version for the Mi A1. Yeah.
But generally, more RAM would also consume more battery.
I wouldn't say so. I would say the key point here is RAM management. So if you have good RAM management, then you'll be fine. So it doesn't matter how much RAM you have, because it only comes into play when you are actively using
the RAM.
Yes.
Okay, so we have the front runner, which is the Mi A2. Then there's the Motorola One, and then there's a Nokia something or other that has.
So the other devices that you need to look at if you want an Android One phone is Nokia. They are really the only other major player with Android One, to my knowledge. So if you can think of more, let me know in the comments below. So the Nokia devices. You have the Nokia 6, you have the Nokia 7, you have the Nokia 8, or previously Nokia 8, now 8.1. So every version they add a 0.1 in front. And then you have the Nokia 5, 3, and 1. So the 1 was the Android Go device that we talked about. And then they recently released the Nokia 6.1 Plus and the 5.1 Plus.
So the 0.1 denotes Android One?
No, the 0.1 denotes a newer version. So like the 6.1, succeeds the 6, for example. Something that's generally the idea. But Nokia is like they have different names for different regions. So usually they launch in China first. So the Nokia 6.1 Plus was previously called the Nokia X6, and now it's the 6.1 Plus.
Yeah, well, we don't want to confuse people.
Yeah, okay. So
in Malaysia, there's 6.1,
6.1,
7.1.
We don't have the 7.1
Okay.
yet, if I'm not mistaken.
And
We
and
have
there's
the 8.1,
8.1, yeah.
and we have the 5.1 Plus.
So those devices are available in Malaysia.
Yes, but the problem with Nokia phones is that you are paying a premium for it.
because of the name.
Because maybe it's because of the name. So in the past, it wasn't always like this. When the Nokia 8 first came out, for example, flagship specs, but you didn't have to pay a flagship price for it. I think it was like 2299 or 2399, something like that. And then from there, the other mid-range devices, they were slightly more expensive than their competition over at Xiaomi, for example. But Xiaomi is like, hard to beat. And Nokia's were better built. So they were really, really solid industrial phones with excellent metal unibodies. So that was like, that sort of balanced out the scales, right? So it wasn't as good value for money in terms of hardware performance, but you get a really well-built phone. And they even had excellent speakers. Then when I saw the Nokia 6.1 Plus launch, I was like, what on earth happened here? I was really quite disappointed. I had this whole video where I was like, really upset with it, because that is a Snapdragon 636 processor, which is slightly below the 660. So it's sort of a mid-ranger processor. And yet it's priced over 1,000 ringgit when it launched. Now you can get it for, I think, 999 ringgit. I think it's on sale now. But that was like way too much money for that kind of specs. And so you would think, oh, okay, because it's better built, right? So it has a better metal unibody. Not really, because they changed their philosophy. It's no longer about metal devices anymore. The Nokia 6.1 Plus was just a glass sandwich, which is like makes it pretty much identical to every other smartphone.
Yeah, it's like an iPhone 4. So it's glass and
then with a metal frame.
Yeah.
Yes. So no, you don't have that industrial super solid feeling device that you get with the Nokia 6, for example.
Yeah.
So that for me was pretty disappointing. So if you want an Android One device, you're gonna have to expect to pay a bit of a premium if you don't want to go for the Mi A2. But that's about it.
But there's no reason for you to go beyond the Mi A2. So you mentioned now there's 3 options, right? At least 3 brands: the Motorola,
Yep.
the Xiaomi, and also the Nokia. So already we can eliminate the Motorola because I don't understand why we need to pay for the premium. It has a HD screen, less capable camera, at least from the hardware aspect, and it's much more expensive. So I don't understand why we need that. So I guess we can eliminate that. And then we have the Nokia range, which to me seems very what's the word I'm looking for? It's commoditized. There's really very different. There's very little in terms of differentiating the 3 variances aside from specs. All of them kind of look the same. They have the same software, which is the Android One.
Yes.
I don't know. For me, I feel like I'm gravitating towards the Xiaomi as well, because number one, experience-wise, the camera is so much better. Android is Android. You get it across the same. I mean, I like the design.
And it's well built.
Yeah.
It looks pretty good. It's
Yeah.
Slim, it's light, charges with USB-C, fast charging.
Yeah.
The only real downside there is the 3000 mAh battery. But if you're not a really heavy user, it might not affect you the same way it affects me.
Yeah. And then, you're in this range where you're looking for a phone that's below 1,000, right? And when you go into the marketing, when you go into this range of devices that's 1,000 ringgit, right? The dynamics changes. People really want the money to work for them. They really want the most that they can get. They want the biggest battery, the most features, the best camera. And the other brands, the Motorola and the Nokia, kind of like missed that philosophy. They're going like, okay, let's price it a bit higher, slightly above 1,000 ringgit, but then it's compromising in terms of display or camera or whatever. And that kind of turns people off within that range. I'm putting 1,000 ringgit on the table. I want the most I can get. And again, the Xiaomi A2 fits that bill.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right with that.
Yeah.
So when you're a budget phone hunter, you're really looking to get the most device for your money.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be sold this premium idea. You know, you just want like raw out and out performance, battery life, screen, whatever you can get for however little money that you need to pay. So that's why I think like in terms of Nokia, the biggest draw here is their brand, right? It's the Nokia brand, which
which doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean,
Not anymore, right?
no, I mean, like, okay, let's say I came from the generation where where Nokia was king. Nokia was like the iPhone back then. I mean, those of you who came from that generation know that, you know, the people that started phones were Nokia. You would not buy anything else other than Nokia. They came out with a lot of phones and a lot of different variables or variances, and then suddenly they fell off this burning platform. iPhone killed them, BlackBerry killed them, and then now they're coming back. But they're coming back trying to hark on that nostalgia, on that Nokia is this brand that was creating all these amazing phones back then before the age of smartphones. The problem is it's not even the same company.
Exactly.
It's not even the same people. So it's just a name, you know. So if you are gonna go buy a Nokia with that notion or that idea that it is the Nokia that you think it was before, I don't think it is anymore. I think a lot of other devices fill in that gap. Xiaomi particularly, even Huawei, even Asus can do a better job than Nokia and Motorola. And again, Motorola has the same problem. It's no longer in its DNA or in its spirit the same company that you grew up with, or I grew up with at least. It's now with Google, right?
It's now with Lenovo. Yes.
It's I mean, there's no point hacking on the brand. And people don't really care. Within that price segment, they don't really care about the brand. Look at Pocophone. It's like some obscure brand. Look at Honor. Look at...
Yeah, and look at the cult following that they have, you know.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, do you want to go down that list of devices? Is there any more other devices other than that? Well, okay, there's a Zenfone, right?
Yeah,
so what about the Zenfone?
There is the Zenfone. So the latest one to come out is the Max Pro M2, which was like succeeding the Max Pro M1, which was also this really popular phone because it was Asus really going for this niche market that was Xiaomi's stronghold and just like meeting them head on with a device that could match them in terms of specs.
So throw everything you can, and price it as low as possible. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, the pricing was even lower than Xiaomi's.
And it has a bigger battery, right?
And it has a bigger battery.
Like 5,000 or something.
Yes, exactly. 5,000. So that's why
huge,
it was ridiculous. So you could get excellent battery life with it. There were a couple of trade-offs. So you lose, for example, 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, which is dual band, slightly faster than your normal 2.4 gigahertz, which is honestly not a huge deal if you ask me. Yeah, but then that smartphone came out and then it was like really competitive with the Xiaomi device. But then after that, they followed up with the Max Pro M2. Yeah. But I think a lot of people mistake this Zenfone line.
There's like a misconception.
Yes, I think a lot of people mistake their operating system because they're running on what they call a stock Android experience. But a lot of people think that it's also Android One. So it's not really like Android One. It's actually slightly different. So there are preloaded apps in the Zenfone's software.
But it's not Android One, period, right?
It's not Android One.
It's not even slightly different. It is not Android One.
It's not Android One.
Because when you have an Android One phone, when you turn it on, it will say Android One or it says Android. It will say Android One,
Yes,
right?
I believe it does.
Okay.
Yes. So this is completely not even an Android One device.
Yeah.
It just runs stock Android. And Asus doesn't try to hide this. They always say that it's a stock Android device. So yeah, it's just people seem to misinterpret that. So the difference between that is right now the software updates, you don't have that Google guarantee.
The 2 year.
Yes, the 2 years. But that being said, Asus's track record, although they are a bit slow with the updates, they have been keeping their phones supported for quite a while. So that's okay. But they do come with a couple of preloaded apps. In Malaysia, for example, you get 3 big ones besides the Asus tools. So you get Facebook, you get Messenger, and you get Instagram. So those cannot be uninstalled. It can be disabled, but it cannot be uninstalled. So previously I was like not happy with that, right? Because like I don't want to be forced to have these apps. But then these are such common apps. These are apps that pretty much everybody use.
Yeah.
You know, I think the impact when it comes to that in terms of bloat is not as great as like a fully skinned Zen UI, for example. But it's not Android One, so do not make that mistake. It's not an Android One device.
So correct the misconception. The Asus Zenfone Max
Pro,
right? Yes. Only that one, right?
Yeah, only that line.
Is not an Android One device. So if you're looking for an Android One device, maybe that is not. But on the flip side, it's not running Zen UI as well, which is Asus OS skin over Android. So it's not running Zen UI. So you do get like a stock experience, but it's not an Android One experience.
Yes.
That just adds the confusion for me actually.
It does,
It's like,
it does.
if you want to, so that means you can run non-Android One OS and still have a stock Android experience. That again, there's no rules.
At least none that I know.
Yeah, it's the intent lah. So if you want if you're very particular about your apps and you know what you want to get, your options would be the pure Android One version. The best one right now is we both agree is the Xiaomi Mi A2, which is
I think about 800 ringgit.
800.
799 right now. Yeah.
That's I think an amazing deal.
It is.
If you're not really particular about an Android One OS, but still would want a stock Android experience, the Zenfone Max
Pro
M2.
It's a really long name.
Zenfone Max Pro M2 with its 5000 milliamp hour battery, really okay, not bad display. The specs, the build quality is really good too. I mean, you did a review for that, right?
Yes, I do have a review for that, and it will be here. Maybe
somewhere or other.
It will appear.
Oh, you can just Google it.
Exactly. So that was actually a very impressive device. So it went from being a Redmi Note 5 competitor at the time with about the same processor, about the same memory configurations, but much bigger battery and a few other sacrifices here and there, to leapfrogging actually the Redmi Note 5, because it was almost as if Xiaomi was a bit slow on the shift towards the more powerful processor. So when they went from Zenfone M1 to M2 had a Snapdragon 660 processor, which is like one tier higher, for example, maybe half a tier higher, something like that. So it's an upper mid-range processor, which means it's a lot more powerful than the Redmi Note 5 that it was so competitive with. But they did that without changing the price. So it's still the same price that you can get the Max Pro M2. I think it's 50 ringgit more expensive for the base model, but the top spec model is exactly the same.
Okay, but then there's a caveat to Zenfone devices. My experience, so there's a lot of Asus Zenfone devices out there in the market. Everything else other than the Zenfone Max 2 Pro M2, whatever, Zenfone Max Pro M2. So other than the Zenfone Max Pro M2, all the other, most of the other Zenfones are kind of neither here nor there. They fall into this bucket of Nokia and Motorola again. If you want a cheap phone, maybe a Honor or a Huawei would be better, or a Xiaomi would be better. But the Zenfone Max Pro M2 kind of like hits the sweet spot of like really great battery life, not bad specs, not bad battery, not bad performance, a camera, and really not bad OS.
Yeah.
So
you're exactly right with that.
So we started out with this question, right? What is the best Android One smartphone you can get out there? Well, okay, the answer is if you want a really good Android One smartphone, you get the Xiaomi Mi
A2, yeah. That would be my recommendation.
For less than 800 ringgit.
Yes.
But if you're not particular about Android One experience, but still want a stock Android experience, try out the Zenfone Max Pro M2.
Yes.
I still cannot say the name in one breath. But just go out there and try it out. If you want to know more, Rory has a review of the, again, Zenfone Pro
Max Pro.
Zenfone Max Pro M2 on our website, switches.com. So the breakdown of devices, Android One, not a lot is available in Malaysia. There's a Motorola option, there's a Nokia option, and there's a Xiaomi option. Recommendation is to get the Xiaomi option. What do you guys think? Do you have any other questions about the Android One experience? You have any comments or whatever? Just let us know in the comment section below. We'll answer them for you.